Then we'll call to order the Planning Commission meeting on April 20th at 6:32. First up is approval of minutes from March 16. Any changes to those? Actually, is there a motion first?
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
All right, moved by Ed, seconded by Rich. Any changes to the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of approving, say aye.
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 And opposed, nay. All right, that is approved. I do not believe we have any public appearances for non-agenda items, do we, Scott? No. All right. Agenda review, anything that we need to change on the agenda, Sonia?
No changes.
All right, then let's get right to it. First up is the certified survey map, CS 237821 by John DeFebre. I believe John is online. John, do you want to talk us through what you're doing here? Oh. You're on mute right now. John, you're on mute right now. John, are you able to get yourself off of mute? Having problems.
Yeah, I can speak once. Oh, there you go, John.
Oh, there you
Are you
go.
off mute now?
No. Oh, John. No. Guess not. Was that Scott? Do you want to?
Yeah. So essentially, this is the same property that came in front of you for the architectural committee meeting. So this was, I believe, before the PC. I believe last month. But the intersection of Notre Dame Drive and Lacey Road, and this is the CSM. That's some right-of-way dedication for the extension of Notre Dame Drive. Some easements that'll satisfy the utilities for stormwater, extension of sanitary sewer, water main, and other service utilities like gas and electric. So we've gone back and forth with the Department of Public Works and everything else. So it's kind of just a quick little brief overview of what we're doing. So.
All right. I'll just check. I don't know if John, you figured out your technical issues, but I'll just check in if you have anything else, if you are able to speak. All right. Seeing nothing for now. Sonia, do you want to do a staff report?
So this is the CSM, as the applicant stated, for the Fitchburg Townhomes project. And I'll just provide a little bit of context for the public as well. This is the project that had obtained recent development approvals, including architectural design review and zoning, to allow the 47-unit condo project to proceed. And the location is off of Lacey Road and Notre Dame Drive. This application is specifically going to replat what is currently an outlet to a lot. It does meet all of the basic land division requirements for lot size and street frontage. And as the applicant stated, it also dedicates the required road right-of-way for Notre Dame Drive, and it provides easements to serve the development as well. All of the conditions are pretty standard. The biggest one is the execution of the subdivision improvement agreement, and that's the document that will outline all of the details related to the public improvement construction. That goes through Board of Public Works and then Council, and that's required prior to signing of the CSM. And then I'll also just point out condition number 8. It requires a minor PDD amendment or Plan Development District amendment to be approved by the Plan Commission prior to city signing of the CSM. And this is really minor. We do anticipate that it will be on the Plan Commission agenda for next month at our May meeting. And a little bit of a preview on that. The PDD, when it was approved a couple of years ago, when this project was initially going through approvals, it referred to a different CSM number. So that was a previous CSM number on an application submitted in 2018. So just for administrative and record purposes, that has to come back just to get the Plan Commission's update with this new CSM number. So you'll see that next month. So again, the staff recommendation is for approval with the 8 conditions as listed in the staff report.
All right, any questions or comments from Plan Commission members? Seeing none, someone want to make a motion? Do you want to show them how it's done? Or Rich?
Okay, I move approval of CSM CS 2378-21 with the 8 conditions from staff.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ed. All in favor, say aye.
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 And opposed, nay. All right, that is approved. All right, thank you, John and Scott. Next is Certified Survey Map CS 2375-21. Is Amy or someone for Circle online? Looks like no. All right, Sonia, do you want to do a staff report then?
This item appeared on our Plan Commission agenda last month, and it was tabled to a date certain of tonight. We're looking to take that same action again, tabling to a date certain of May 18th, our next Plan Commission meeting. The tabling is at the request of the applicant for the purpose of continuing to work through questions regarding right-of-way and other details, technical details on the CSM.
Okay. Does someone want to move to postpone until May 18th?
I'll move to postpone until May 18th.
Second.
Seconded by Zach. All in favor, say aye.
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 And opposed, nay. All right, that is postponed to May 18th, the next Planning Commission. Yep. All right, Resolution R6521. Is there someone online to speak to this one? Doesn't seem like it.
No, I will cover this one as well.
All right.
This is an agreement as drafted in your packet by our Economic Development Department, which addresses planned construction over the Badger State Trail. Ultimately, what we're looking for here on this item is also to table it. And the reason is the agreement isn't actually attached or prepared yet. So the situation here is the Lacey Road reconstruction will impact the Badger State Trail where it crosses Lacey Road, and there are a number of overlapping entities, the DNR, the DOT, and the railroad that need to agree to allow the city to make those improvements in that area. So no concerns necessarily. It's just that the DOT person who's working on this agreement apparently had retired, and they're working with that individual to come back and draft the agreement. It's not ready yet. We're asking that this be tabled to a date certain of May 18th. We're not entirely sure if it will be ready by that point either, but we'll address it at that time.
Okay, so even though it says approve, right now we want to postpone it. All right, is there a motion to do that?
I'll move to postpone Resolution R6521 to May 18th.
Second.
Seconded by Randy. I'll give that one to Randy. All right, all in favor of postponing till May 18th, say aye.
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 And opposed, nay. All right, so that is postponed. All right, next is public utility easement, Resolution R8521. This must be you as well, Sonia.
This is an easement location in the Fahey Field subdivision, specifically in the 5th phase, which is beginning construction in 2021. The easement location is on lot 96 of that plat, and we need to release an existing 6-foot wide utility easement that is not sufficient to maintain a storm sewer pipe that needs to go in. So the document that's on your screen now is the exhibit showing the areas that would be released in hatching. And then the document and the resolution also would accept a new easement dedicated to the public for stormwater purposes.
All right, any questions or comments? And someone want to do a motion?
I move to approve resolution R 8521.
I'll second.
Seconded, so moved by Emily, seconded by Rich. All in favor, say aye.
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 And opposed, nay. All right, that is approved. Next, resolution R 8921. Sonia, is this you again?
This is a resolution that approves an amendment to a subdivision improvement agreement. The plat that this affects is the 6th addition to 9 Springs. So that specifically is located along Lacey Road. And it's the location in Smart Code where Avante has some multifamily apartment developments going up there, including Raven and Falcon, I think is the next one that was under construction there. Usually the Plan Commission does not get involved in the details of subdivision improvement agreements, but where there is a phasing plan, our land division ordinance requires that the Plan Commission approve those. So that's what's being requested here. Usually the public improvements would be required to be done prior to occupancy in the plat. Instead, the request here is to allow occupancy on that first multifamily building, which I believe is called Falcon, and then allow the public improvements, which is simply a 10-foot path, to be constructed after that. And occupancy would then be restricted on the second phase in the plat of the next development. So they would not be able to get an occupancy permit on phase 2 until the path is done. And the reason for the request of this phasing is to accommodate a little bit of a different difficult construction situation where the buildings are close together and there's concern about construction of the foundations, damaging a path, and then having to rip it out and pay for construction of it again. So the phasing just accommodates that construction difficulty.
And for those who don't know, this is right across the street from Phoenix on what I call New Lacey Road. That should not be called Lacey Road, but I don't think we have a chance to say that as a city.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Where is this path? Sorry, I know there's the path that runs behind, so this is not that path, correct? It's some other path?
That's correct, and I have an exhibit here on the screen. So the red outline is the 2 different phases. This is the building that's under construction now in phase 1. The path goes right through here. You can see that tan line. So that's Outlot 89 where the path would sit.
Okay, that's what I figured. Just thought I'd ask.
Sonia, are they doing both of these last 2 buildings at the same time in phase 2 then? Or are they staggering these one year after the other?
I think they're staggering them.
Okay. Other questions or comments on this?
Yeah, Sonia, what happens if there is a long delay or phase 2 doesn't move forward within some reasonable period of time? Is there a requirement to put the path in place?
I do believe that the agreement requires that the improvements are done within 48 months.
They already have a hole dug for the first building in phase 2.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, they've already started on it.
So that clearly seems to be moving
Yeah.
forward. But either way, within 48 months, they've got to put in the path. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep,
Great.
yep.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments? Or a motion?
I'll move to approve resolution R 8921.
Second.
Moved by Zach, seconded by Ed. All in favor, say aye.
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 And opposed, nay. All right, that is approved. Now, F, the resolution for the public, G, the ag zone districts.
Actually, F.
It is F. There's 2 there's 2 bike path easements, sorry. Yeah, F. All right, go ahead, Sonia.
Yeah, so this one's related to the last issue that we talked about. The last issue was amending the subdivision improvement agreement. This is requiring a larger easement for that path that we discussed. So due to the phasing of the construction, it allows the path to be constructed at the standard width per city public works specifications. So this just requires that easement to be amended to the 10-foot width.
All right, any questions or comments on this one? Seeing none, is there a motion? Randy, go ahead.
The button. Motion to approve resolution R-90-21.
Second.
All right, seconded by Emily. All in favor, say aye.
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 And opposed, nay. All right, that is also approved. On to G. And I'm guessing this might be why Wade is here possibly. Is Wade taking this one, or starting off anyway?
And I think Ed, as our representative, might give a little introduction.
Oh, all right.
First. So I'll turn it over.
Sure. So Ag and Rural initially took up the idea of allowing some potential conditional uses in ag zoning. And the reason for that is, as we focus on our comprehensive plan, which envisions a portion of the city to be urbanized and develop over a period of time, and other portions of the city to remain open space for an agriculture. We want to encourage and just make it easier for the conversion that we're seeing from dairy to cash cropping to more intensive type food production that's going to serve more of the local community. And as we look at that, we can see things that already exist in the city that we think would be ideal, like Apple Garden's a great example. Apple Garden actually could not be done under our current zoning. It's it's grandfathered in because it's been there for quite a while. But what we looked at Ag and Rural is not wanting to get in the way of that type of agricultural development. Recognizing also that there's going to be a need for, it may be food processing, it may be an implement dealer, any of these things that you really need as infrastructure to support agriculture, we want to at least be able to consider as a conditional use under ag zoning. So that's really what this is all about. I'll let Wade get into the details of that and the different things that could potentially be allowed. Again, it would all be, conditional use. So it would be something that would still come, that Ag and Rural and the Plan Commission would still look at in the future. The one thing that has come up and we spent quite a bit of time on, and it really is not the focus of this, but it was a use that was considered by Ag and Rural, and after going back and forth quite a bit, it's the idea of an events type structure, wedding barn, whatever you might want to call it. Certainly an argument can be made that that type of thing is better suited for the urban service area. But on the other hand, there are certainly a lot of people who have been to and appreciate the opportunity to have an event in a wedding barn. So then the question becomes, under what circumstances would you allow that? Would you allow that at all? How many of these might we want? If you're going to allow it, or we're going to have a proliferation of this type of thing, would it be something that you'd allow as new construction? This is what we really spent quite a bit of time on, although the whole purpose of this was to support agriculture. Well, I don't see that as being something that supports agriculture. It doesn't necessarily conflict with it either. So I would be very curious to get Plan Commission's feedback on that in particular. But again, the focus of all of this is something that would support agriculture. So from there, I guess, Wade, do you want to take it from there?
Sure. Thanks, Ed. Hello, Plan Commission. It sounds like you might have some new members. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Wade Thompson, planner with the city's Planning and Zoning Department. So I would ask to share my screen if that works.
Yep, go ahead.
So yeah, I got about a 15-minute presentation to just kind of give you guys some background, some context, and then certainly can answer any questions or take any comments the commission might have. All right, so as Ed nicely introduced, we're here tonight to talk potential modifications to our city's ag zoning districts. And we talk about our ag zoning districts, we have three. We have our AX, ag exclusive, our AT, which is our ag transition, and our AS, which is our ag small. So again, I just want to talk about, the rationale for these proposed modifications, and more specifically, why agriculture in Fitchburg is fairly unique. Then we'll talk about the timeline, kind of where we've been, where we hope to go with these modifications. And then we'll get into the meat of the modifications. We'll talk about essentially changes to what I'll call 3 use categories: an ag accessory use category, an ag related use category, and then what Ed was alluding to, this idea of a rural event venue. And then we'll talk about next steps and wrap it up. So as I think about agriculture, and I've been doing ag planning in Fitchburg for about 9 years now, I really think about 3 things. I think about economics, environment, and identity. As I think we all know, Fitchburg is incredibly unique as a city. We're a city of 30,000. We've got urban land uses, we've got suburban land uses, and we've got rural land uses, almost 11,000 acres of agricultural land. So that obviously presents challenges, but it also presents opportunities. So I think this idea of, good, smart growth, advancing our local food system, developing our economy, our businesses, and then tourism and recreation are all things that can be part of agriculture in the city. And again, are premised on that idea of economics, good environment, and good identity for the city. So kind of with that big picture, I do want to talk, geography. I think we all know where we're at in the world. Obviously, Fitchburg is minutes. Well, we're part of an urban center. We're minutes from a mid-sized city of 250,000 people. By car, you can get from the Isthmus and Madison to Fitchburg's agricultural lands in about 16 minutes, 8 miles. By bike with our nice trail systems, it's about a 40-minute ride from the Isthmus to our ag lands, or about an 8-mile ride. So again, very proximate to a large population that's demanding fairly progressive agricultural commodities. And that leads to my next slide. I think, again, that presents a ton of opportunity, both regionally and in our city for agriculture, everything from, farmers markets to community gardens to ag tourism, to, processing, dairy stores, pizza nights on the farm, wineries, artisan cheese products, just the whole gamut of, again, what I would call this idea of a real local, sustainable food system. So with all that in mind, we have crafted plans and policies that recognize Fitchburg's unique ag identity and those opportunities that I just discussed. So in our recent readoption of our comp plan, we talked a lot about maintaining and enhancing, the agricultural element of our city. And furthermore, back in 2017, we did adopt what we call our city ag plan. So kind of a comprehensive plan specifically for agriculture. And in both the comp plan and the ag plan, again, we did lay the groundwork for exploring modification to our ag zoning districts. Again, under the idea of really expanding our local food system, quote unquote, upvaluing our agricultural lands in terms of the value of those lands. And then on a related note, really creating diversity and economic opportunity for our city's ag landowners. So kind of transitioning into kind of where we've been with this and where we hope to go. As Ed alluded to, the ag committee has spent a lot of time on this. I commend them for their effort. They put a lot of thought, a lot of brain power into the ideas we'll talk about tonight. So certainly appreciate being able to work with the ag committee on this. But yeah, we started back in October, kind of went through a lot of iterations, a lot of different versions of things. And then at the March meeting, we came to some closure, and I'll be presenting those recommendations tonight that the ag committee came up with at their March meeting. So that brings us to tonight. Obviously nothing is being decided tonight. This is merely an informational item for the Plans Commission, just for your general information. And certainly if there's comments or things that we should be incorporating into the draft proposed changes, that's what we'd like to talk about tonight. And then after tonight, the next month plus, staff will get with other city departments, other staff that may be affected by these potential changes. We'll talk to them. If there's relevant feedback, that will be incorporated into our final modification proposal as well. And then I would say in the next few months, staff will begin that resolution and referral process. basically to get these modifications in front of our council. Then they will kick it back to the committees, through our referral process. You guys will see it. A committee will see it, potentially some other committees will see it as well. So that's, again, kind of the where we've been, where we're going. So now moving into, the modifications themselves, I think probably a good place to start is with just kind of this big picture of what is agriculture in the city. And what I have on the screen in front of you is the definition of agricultural uses, which essentially comes from state statute. And then what Fitchburg does is we've adopted that statute language and put it into our zoning ordinance. So as you can see, agriculture means a lot of things. It's fairly generalized. There's a lot of wiggle room to qualify as ag use, but this is kind of the premise of our discussion in terms of what is an ag use. So again, moving more specifically into these proposed modifications, I'll kind of group it into two categories. The first category is we're adding to and modifying two types of uses in our zoning ordinance, two existing uses, what we call ag accessory uses, which are basically, and I'm paraphrasing the definitions, but essentially supporting, incidental to, or not inhibiting an agricultural use. So that use that we just looked at on the previous slide. And then ag-related uses are a little bit more stringent. They are essentially uses that support, in a strict manner, agricultural uses. So again, we're going to add and modify to those two use categories. And then we're also going to add a third use of what we're calling a rural event venue. And that's, kind of a wordy definition, maybe a term more familiar to people is wedding barn. So that's kind of a layman's term. But in our zoning code, assuming these modifications get approved, we would propose the term rural event venue. So with that, I think I'll try to give you the Cliff's Notes versions here. I'm not going to get caught in the weeds. This was all in a memo to you guys in your pack, but I do just want to briefly run through the changes. Again, recommended by the A committee. There's about, I believe, 7 changes. So I'll just try to quickly get through those, and then we can certainly go back and pick at them if the committee wants more detail. So again, the first kind of modification category is definitions. So we played with 2 definitions. We tweaked one definition and we added another. So the one we tweaked was ag entertainment. And I've not yet touched on what that is, but basically ag entertainment is, think about corn mazes, think about, maybe wagon rides, things like that are entertaining, quote unquote, but very strictly related to agriculture. So what we did there is and ag entertainment can be both an ag accessory and an ag related use. So it's kind of under one of those 2 use types. So what we did here is basically add a small phrase that made sure that if you're going to do ag entertainment, that it's not the primary use of a property, it's secondary to a primary agricultural use. And I think that's probably implied, when people are doing these things. But as quote unquote ag entertainment becomes more popular, we just wanted to make sure that as we see additional proposals that qualify as ag entertainment, they are secondary to that primary use of agriculture in the city's rural land. So that's, I guess, modification or change number 1. Change number 2, a little bit more substantial. And again, what we're doing here is creating a definition for a rural event venue. And then once we have that definition, later we'll talk about the conditions to allow for that use to happen. So, and I'll spend a few minutes on this definition because there is a lot packed in here. And I think I just want to pull out a few pieces. So I apologize for reading to you, but I do want to kind of paraphrase the definition. So basically a rural event venue is an existing agricultural building, a new agricultural building of a rustic architectural style, or an existing building of said style. So basically what we're saying here is there's 3 types of buildings that can qualify as a rural event venue. The first is a building that's already there that has an agricultural purpose, okay? The second building that we would allow as a rural event venue is a new building that serves an agricultural purpose. But it can't just look like a pole barn. It's got to look nice. It's got to look like have a nice architectural aesthetic to it. So that's the second building we're allowing. The third building is just think about an old farm or an old barn. It's not in use anymore. It's not serving the agricultural purpose, but it has that look. It has that nice, timeless architectural look, and it's existing. That could also be converted into a rural event venue. Now, a fourth building type that we're not allowing as a rural event venue would be a brand new building that doesn't have any agricultural purpose. So this building could be on a farm, but if it's new and it doesn't support the farm, it doesn't support the ag use, we're not allowing it under this definition as currently construed. So I think that's an important point to make. And we can certainly talk more about that, but the ag committee did discuss that quite a bit, and this is what they came up with. And then just to finish the definition, rural event venue would require a rural location located outside our urban service area and equipped to host organized meetings, social gatherings, including but not limited to weddings, parties, and corporate events. So I know there's a lot there, but again, we can go back and certainly pick at that. So again, that's kind of the change category 1 of definitions. Change category 2 is actually, okay, let's talk permitted and conditional uses in terms of what we will allow in terms of new and modified uses in our ag zoning district. So essentially what we're saying here is, again, under the ag accessory category and under the ag related category, we've got various tweaks to permitted and conditional uses. So I'll start with tweaks to the permitted use, a permitted use under the ag accessory category. And this is really minor. All we're doing is adding the word solar panels. So understanding that renewables are obviously here to stay, and we want to promote those as a city. We're basically saying you can do solar panels on your farm if it's intended to just serve your farm. So we would add that wording to our AX and AT districts, and we would also add it to the AS district as well. So the second tweak to our ag accessory uses are conditional use. And this kind of alludes again to some points Ed was making. So under letter B there, what we're talking about is the ability to create a commodity on your farm. Let's say you want to make salsa. You can then distribute that salsa on your farm. So if you want to have a little shop set up where you're making the salsa on the farm, you're putting it in cans and you want to sell it on the farm, this would allow for you to do that. So basically it's the idea of you can do retail on your farm if it's finishing a product or selling a product that was created from products grown on that farm. So that's, I think I have some numbering off there, but well, I guess the first change I talked about on this page should have been change number 3. Change 4 is the retail that I just talked about. And then change number 5, right below that, basically what we're saying here is that you can do ag entertainment, again, per the definition we just talked about, in the ag small district, which means you could have a lot anywhere from 10 to 34 acres. And we're saying if you want to have more than 150 people on an ag small lot for ag entertainment, as a conditional use, the city will consider that. So I think we earlier had a much smaller cap, but this is basically saying if you want to explore, a larger ag entertainment activity on an ag small lot, this gives a person the ability to do that as a conditional use. So the last change on this page, change number 6. This is a conditional use under ag related. Now this ties into the retail change I just talked about. So when we talk about a local food system, really what that means is producing, processing, and distributing of ag commodities or food products all in the same general area. So again, kind of the 3 tiers of production, processing, and distribution. So production basically just means growing. We allow that no problem. The distribution we just talked about under change number 4. Change number 6 is that middle piece, the processing. So again, using the salsa example, someone's growing tomatoes, they're growing peppers. You know, they can then do their canning. Maybe it's a small scale canning operation, but that's considered processing. So they can do that processing, and then they can also sell all on the same farm. So with the B above and the A that I'm just talking about, again, you can grow, process, and distribute all on the same farm. So that's really the gist of those 2 changes. And then this is the last change. This is change number 7. Probably the one, again, that the Ag Committee spent the most time on. But we're still talking about, you know, uses. So this would be a new standalone use, rural event use, not under the ag accessory category, nor under the ag related category, but its own use type. And again, this is defined as we talked about a few slides ago. So basically what we're saying here is that you can do a rural event venue if it meets the definition, but it's a conditional use, and we've got a long laundry list of conditional uses. And I think in talking with other staff, you know, we'll probably put this laundry list right in the code. I think that's probably where it makes the most sense. And there will be some tweaks to this. There will be some non-substantive tweaks just to ensure that we don't duplicate existing city processes or contradict existing city processes. But point being is there will be a lot of conditions for a rural event venue to happen. And I'm just going to quickly run through I'll run through all of them very quickly. I think the first one is the most important by far. So we're saying if you want to do a rural event venue, you're going to be only in our ag small, which basically those lot size parameters go from, I might have misspoke earlier, from 3 acres to 35 acres or 34 acres. But what we're saying is for a rural event venue, you can go from 3 acres to 10 acres. You can't do a rural event venue on 20 or 30 acres. And it needs to be part of a farm. And we define farm as all land under common ownership that is primarily devoted to agricultural use. So between having it being part of a farm and the definition I mentioned earlier, the Ag Committee is really tying a rural event venue back to farming. It's not just a rural event venue on rural lands that has no connection to farming. What the Ag Committee has done is really made that a very solid tie to a farming and an agricultural use. And then just quickly running through these other conditions, B and C basically talk about landscaping, you know, making it look nice with some landscaping buffers. D just talks about access, you know, for public roads, some pretty standard zoning language. E and F are essentially talking about traffic, you know, how do we minimize traffic issues in our rural areas. G and H are talking about parking parameters. I is, you know, some signage requirements, pretty standard stuff for zoning. Signage and lighting, I should add. J is talking, you know, fire codes, building inspection, all those sorts of things. K just makes it very clear that we're not allowing some other uses that folks may assume we would allow under rural event, you know, no fireworks. You know, if bonfires, we want to, you know, require some approvals. You know, just really putting the lid on some of these other uses. L just talks about music, noise, sound permits. We might tweak that one a bit to be consistent with other city sound permitting processes. M talks about alcohol. Again, I think we'll connect with our clerks and make sure we're consistent there with our alcohol permitting. And then N just talks about various other uses that could happen on a rural event venue site that are, again, related to kind of ag and that are consistent with a rural event venue. So, you know, hay rides, you know, outdoor site for wedding ceremonies, you know, things of that nature. And then O, I believe is the last thing we've got here. Basically, this just kind of says when the applicant is submitting an application, you know, they're going to have to put together a very thorough application with a site plan, you know, with all the the I's dotted, the T's crossed, size of venue, guest capacity, floor plan, signage and lighting, hours of operation, months of operation, types of events, anticipated number of events, number of attendees, employee numbers, again, music, sound, amplification, any other outdoor temporary structures. And then we also are requiring essentially a deed restriction, which basically says that, this rural event venue will not cease to be a rural event venue 5 years from now and become a nightclub or a automotive garage. It will either stay a rural event venue or will revert to something that is consistent with other uses allowed in our ag small. So no slippery slope here in terms of, potential future uses that aren't consistent with ag. And then 11, 12, insurance and any other reasonable request that our administrator thinks should be part of this application. So again, that's kind of a quick and dirty of 5 months of work by the ag committee. In terms of next steps, again, glad to take comments tonight for incorporation into the draft recommendations. Again, we will meet with other city staff to get their sense of this. And then we will start the formal city resolution referral process to include a public hearing, at the Plan Commission. And then assuming all goes relatively smooth, we incorporate whatever gets approved into our zoning code. So with that, certainly can take any questions or comments the commission might have.
All right, I do have one comment from the public. I'll read that quick. This is from Jeff Schleicher, who lives in Verona. And he says, I support the city's Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee's recommended modifications to agricultural zoning districts, particularly the creation of a definition for rural event venues. Not only does this help achieve the objective of diversifying the economic opportunities of agricultural landowners, it can also help the economic development of the city as a whole, given the impact such a venue can have on the city's hotels, caterers, and other businesses. It also has the potential to create a beautiful landmark in rural Fitchburg, preserving the rural character of the city's agricultural lands, adding to the city's tax base, adding to employment opportunities in rural Fitchburg, and has the potential to serve the community as a place for community meetings and family life events. I would ask the Planning Commission to consider one modification that was discussed with some support within the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee. Instead of limiting rural event venues to existing or new agricultural buildings, or an existing building of a similar rustic agricultural, I would suggest it should also be open to new buildings of a similar rustic architectural style. This would result in a venue that can be totally ADA compliant, meet or exceed all fire codes, meet the conditional restrictions proposed by the committee, and since it would be built specifically as an event venue, it can be designed to best accommodate such events and result in a beautiful building perfectly sited in the rural landscape. Thank you. I'm not aware of any other comments unless Lisa or Sonia is. All right. Then, with that, questions, comments from Plan Commission members? I don't know, maybe if Wade or someone wants to speak to the gentleman's comments, but Rich, go ahead.
Well, when I first heard this, the term wedding barn just set me off, and I was very worried, but I think I've changed just in this presentation. I think he's handled it well, especially limiting it to the AS and to 3 to 10 acres. I do have a thing about the alcohol. What are the city's licensing requirements for that? If you're going to have, let's say, 200 people at a wedding and you're going to have booze, well, you hope you have booze. I wouldn't be there otherwise.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, we'll need to connect with the clerks on that and be consistent with what, what the city allows. Sonia, I don't know if you have anything to add on your experience as ZA with alcohol. I don't know if you have any experience with alcohol permitting, but anything to add on that or?
No, really just defer to the clerks. They'll handle it the same they do for other liquor licensing. Yep.
And there are some events that happen in rural Fitchburg that get alcohol licenses or event licenses already, so I'm sure that it'll be very similar to that. Does someone, I don't know, maybe it's Ed or someone want to speak to his comment about wanting to change and add another option for style and maybe some of the discussion on agri and rural affairs about it?
I think the additional option that's being proposed would be a new building in an agricultural style that is being built specifically as a wedding venue. And that is something that the majority of people on ag and rural were not supportive of. If someone wants to take an old barn and rehab it, a dairy barn that otherwise perhaps would be falling apart, and use it for this type of purpose, that would be something that we would be more supportive of. But the idea of just having venues like this crop up outside of the urban service area, take up agricultural land, is not what ag and rural had in mind.
So if my understanding is right, this is saying if you wanted to build a wedding barn that looked like a barn, cool, that fits. However, if you want to build a wedding barn that looks like a convention center, that doesn't fit?
No, this says that if you want to build one that looks like a barn, you have to be building it for a primary agricultural purpose. You could also use it then as an event venue, but it would have to have, if it's going to be a new building, it has to have a primary agricultural purpose. Or you can
And just
rehab an old
one clarification on that, Ed.
Yeah, go ahead.
The way, my understanding of the way it came out of the ag committee is the use of the building doesn't have to be primarily for ag. It needs to support ag, so it needs to be a quote unquote ag building. But where the primary ag comes in is the land use. So, if we have a 10-acre rural event venue site, the majority of that property needs to be devoted to agriculture.
Right, and the building would be used for agriculture. Maybe, primary,
Right.
I guess, is kind of hard to define, but.
Right, exactly, yep. But there would need to be, there would need to be some agricultural use of that building that supports the broader farm, yep.
Right.
Questions, comments?
I guess maybe just to follow up on that, maybe I just don't understand, like, if you're gonna have an event, but this building is also gonna be, purposed for doing ag work, does that create potential safety issues?
Well, yeah, good. So that's where the original wedding barn concept came from. You know what I mean? It was a concept where an ag building would be transitioned 4 times a year to host events.
Mm-hmm.
As that concept's evolved, it's gotten away from that. But I think the ag committee, again, they wanted to tie it back to the farm, back to an ag use. So, yeah, I mean, a person would probably have to get pretty, I don't want to say creative, but there would need to be accommodations made where it could serve, it meets the standards for public gatherings for building inspection, but it also is able to function as an ag support building. So there would need to be thought in how that thing gets planned and developed. I mean, one example is we do currently have a facility in the city, an old barn that qualifies as an agricultural building, quote unquote, but also is hosting events. So it can be done.
Yeah, I just wouldn't want to unintentionally, put burdens and limits, if someone's trying to do this and then, well, anyway, having been to a couple of farm barns, most of them, as far as I could tell, were not being used for any type of agricultural use at that point. They've been fully converted, and usually it was a secondary building that they had other buildings that were being used for farming purposes, but this one, event purposed only. So,
yep, and that's where and that's where at this point, the interpretation of agricultural use, we've not defined that, so that could either be defined more thoroughly or could be left to broader interpretation.
Yep.
Emily, do you want to speak? Yeah.
Thank you. I had a question. In terms of creating these event spaces, what do you expect the stress to be on public works, and specifically, do we need to think about public improvements? Do we need, sewer, et cetera, water, et since they'll be out of the urban service area?
Yeah, and certainly feel free to chime in, but yeah, basically, if it's not in our urban service area, we don't service it with sewer and water.
Right.
So it would be well and septic. You know, we do have similar facilities on a limited basis in our rural areas that we've been able to, you know, make sure they meet code and, you know, not create undue burdens on other city departments. To that point, you know, that was, I think, number 2 in the timeline here is, you know, after tonight, we will connect with other city departments and get their sense of this proposal and, you know, burdens on them or thoughts from them, and that'll all be part of the package we ultimately take to council. So, yeah.
That's correct. And just to add one more small detail, as Wade mentioned, extension of urban services definitely is not allowed outside of the urban service area. That's not only a City of Fitchburg decision, but a CARP-C, Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, and Department of Natural Resources restriction as well, outside of the sewer service or urban service area. But they would still need to provide those amenities. So my understanding is that septic fields would be able to accommodate the type of size needed for these types of events and the capacity of people that would be attending those events. So that would be a burden on the property owner to provide that facility. And then also if it's a converted or a new building, it would need to comply with the fire code and building inspection requirements for sprinkler systems. So that would be an investment from the property owner as well, to provide some sort of large water holding tank in order to get adequate pressure to sprinkle the building.
I know I like the idea of the flexibility or the options that this could provide. When I think of places like Sassy Cow Creamery, Schuster's Farm, there's a lot of places that I visited. I know a lot of people like to go, especially with families, and I like the idea that these types of things could hopefully come to Fitchburg. I think we've got some great areas for some of those types of businesses. So I do like the flexibility to kind of bring some of that it's almost like ag tourism in a way. And I think that it's a great way to celebrate our heritage too and our tradition of farming in Fitchburg. Other thoughts or comments at all? Is there anything else specifically, Wade, that you wanted us to comment on?
Yeah, we just, you know, again, the ag committee's been thinking about this for some years, and then, you know, they spend months putting it together. And, you know, we just wanted, with the ag committee being an advisory committee to this body, we just wanted to get you guys in front of you before it comes to, you know, via a formal referral process. So there was no, you know, no surprises. But yeah, no, just again, informational item. And I think, you know, it sounds like folks understand what's going on, and that was the goal. So.
Yeah, I think we wanted to know, you know, if there's any objection on Plan Commission's part to really kind of opening up the ag zoning a bit to the types of uses that have not been allowed in the past, but that we feel would be supportive of our agricultural transition. That's one topic. And then I think as kind of a separate topic, does the Plan Commission feel that a rural event venue is something appropriate outside of the urban service area? Is this something that we want or don't want? And I think that those are really two completely separate questions that, you know, we'd like to get a feel for what this body thinks.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, Wade, for your time. And with that, we can go to our presentation on smart code. And is that, Lisa, are you kind of leading this one? All right.
All right. My microphone's on. Hopefully everyone can hear me through my mask. Try to speak up if needed. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen. So the main purpose of this is to just introduce everybody to smart code zoning and just provide kind of a brief overview about our ordinances, what the approval process looks like, and then some of the projects that have been approved over time. I think Plan Commission has indicated some interest in the past in kind of learning more about smart code zoning, because a lot of these items tend to not come to Plan Commission, so you don't interact with that portion of the code as much as you do with others. So try to keep it brief. So just wanted to quickly touch on kind of why Fitchburg has smart code and some of the background for the reasons why it was adopted. So smart code zoning was adopted in 2010. And smart code zoning is also consistent with various policies outlined in the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan, outlines goals and policies for the city. And some of those include promoting transit-oriented development, developing mixed-use neighborhoods, setting higher architectural standards for private developments. And so smart code zoning was found to, further some of the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. And then also at the same time, the state's smart growth law, which is the same law that requires all communities to adopt a comprehensive plan, had also directed cities to adopt a traditional neighborhood development by 2011, or a traditional neighborhood development ordinance. So a smart code, I'll get into the details a little bit more of exactly what traditional neighborhood development means, but the smart code ordinance was a way of complying with that directive from the state. So just a little bit of background on why we have it. So in this presentation, I'll go over some of the basic smart code principles so you can understand, the underlying principles of our ordinance and what the ordinance actually looks like, as well as the approval process, and then just briefly some smart code projects so that you can see how the ordinance actually translates on the ground. So I had mentioned traditional neighborhood development before. So there are a few kind of main ideas behind traditional neighborhood development, including the focus of human scale over auto-oriented scale, walkability, mixed-use neighborhoods, as well as an emphasis on public spaces. So that's like sidewalks, parks, places for social gathering. And the idea here is really, with human scale, like what does it feel like for a person to be on a street? Do they feel safe? Do they feel comfortable? Do they have access to neighborhood services, shops? Can they walk places, mixed-use neighborhoods? I think we've touched on some of these things in the past, especially with the comprehensive plan, and when we evaluate developments throughout the city. So that's one element of smart code, that it really tries to take these principles and then turn it into an ordinance that can be implemented to recreate this. So in that way, wanted to touch on a couple of critical smart code elements, and these are things that often when we meet with like developers or builders are the main points that we're touching on, because smart code is usually a new type of code for developers and builders to work with. So one of those things is block perimeter limits, which essentially is limiting a block size, and that's what creates a walkable neighborhood. So how far do people have to walk from one block to the next, and what's being provided within that block as well. The second would be lot width maximums. So in smart code, we limit lot width. And again, that's primarily to create, a walkable environment, but also going back to that human scale. So how wide and tall a building is, it affects, your interaction with the public space. So that's one thing. And then the third is frontage build out. And this is usually something people are not familiar with, but it essentially creates spatial containment by creating a street wall. So again, thinking about the pedestrian on the street and how they feel in a space. Spatial containment is an important component of that. And so what frontage build out means is that a certain percent of the lot width must have a building facade located close to the lot line. So if you're thinking about like a lot of main streets throughout Wisconsin, even in small communities, the buildings are close to the sidewalk, and they're creating that sense of enclosure. And specifically in smart code, it sets specific parameters. So if you have an 80% frontage build out requirement and you have a 100-foot wide lot, that means that the building facade needs to be 80 feet wide. It needs to be set close to the property line, and there has to be limited variation in that facade. So it's like a lot of like, basically if you're in a downtown area, that feeling. Hopefully we've all experienced that. But those are the ways which in smart code tries to promote traditional neighborhood development through ordinance language.
Lisa, can I interrupt you with
Yeah,
just a quick question? Because this has come up a few times too, and that's the variation on the building facade. Can you kind of address why that's important?
Yeah. Right. So again, I think it gets back to some I think, traditional planning principles and talking about geography and traditional neighborhood development, but with smart code and specifically with frontage build out, you have a building facade and we limit building variation to 18 inches, so like 1.5 feet, which is pretty small, especially to like, let's say like an architect. But it's really about creating a street wall so that when you're walking, if you are the pedestrian on the sidewalk, you have a street wall on one side, and let's say you have, you know, your street trees, your terrace, a bike path, and then the road, and you're creating, you know, that's your right of way, as opposed to, you know, there are a lot of other developments, let's say throughout the city, where you might have a 30-foot setback for a building, and then maybe the building goes back, you know, 20 feet, and then comes back out, goes back, and goes out 30 feet, and you're just not creating like a sense of place for a person. I hope that kind of elaborates. I think that if you walk down, you know, like the Nine Springs neighborhoods where some of those apartments were constructed, you walk down a street like that versus maybe like some of our older apartments, you'll really, I think, get the difference of how that feels. Yeah. And yeah, feel free to ask questions throughout, and I'll try to provide some opportunities for that as well. So another sort of main element to smart code is the idea of a form-based code, and this is one of the ways where it really differentiates from other zoning districts in the city. So it focuses on form and scale rather than land use, and by form and scale, we're talking building width, building height, facade variation, we just discussed, over use. So like our standard Euclidean zoning districts, you have low-density residential, high-density residential, business, industrial, and you're really creating like isolated areas in the city. And so this type of focus on form and scale, where you're saying, you know, what's the building size and height over the use, and you're really allowing for a mix of uses as opposed to this kind of separation. And then another aspect of this is thinking about the relationship between the building, the lot, the block, and the street. So rather than, you know, in our, let's say, low-density residential zoning district, you're really saying you can have a single-family house here and it needs to be this far from the street. But you're not thinking about how big is the block, what type of street, like how wide are the sidewalks, how many parking spaces are being provided, and how some of those things are more suitable for different types of uses and different densities and things like that. And then one other one is that it implements the rural to urban transect. So this is something that you can find in communities throughout the country, where if you look at a community, you go to the outskirts, you're looking at a rural area, and as you move towards the center of a community, you're seeing an increase in the intensity of human use, which really is like an increase in density, increase in the built environment, these types of things. And so this is one of the main elements for smart code, because in smart code you have different transects, and it's the transects that dictate, you know, what uses are permitted, what densities are permitted, and things like that. And the idea is that each transect has an appropriate level of walkability, diversity of use, and density, with the idea that, you know, in more rural areas, there can be a lower standard for walkability. You're going to have less variety in uses and obviously a lower density, as opposed to when you get into more of an urban area, you're seeing an increase in all of those. And just to focus a little bit more, so it's really the transects, each have their own kind of physical form and character. So you can see in transect 1, there you're going to basically be seeing like floodplains, wetlands, things like that. And then in T2, you're thinking rural, so rural Fitchburg, farms, you know, isolated farmsteads. T3, more of a suburban, you know, we have a lot of kind of typical low-density suburban areas in the city, so single-family lots. And then as you get into T4 and T5, you're seeing an increase in density, so things like townhomes, you know, apartment buildings, some neighborhood scale commercial. And then T5, you're seeing, you know, apartment buildings, mixed use blocks, townhouses, kind of a variety of housing styles and densities. Fitchburg, we don't utilize Transect 6, but that would be kind of like downtown Madison would be the equivalent. And then we also have special districts, and that really allows for, sometimes a use can't be accommodated in a transect. And so you do have the opportunity to create a special district with its own parameters for development. So getting into, the concept of transects is really important to smart code because the idea is that a complete neighborhood should have a variety of transects. And in that way, you're providing, a variety of types of housing, different densities, different mixes of uses, and that's what creates a neighborhood that's walkable, that's at a human scale, and meets a lot of those goals from the comprehensive plan as well. So hopefully that kind of explains that in a good way. And then getting into special districts as well. So a special district is a transect that by its intrinsic use, disposition, or configuration does not conform to one or more of the transects. So Fitchburg has created 2 special districts since first adopting the code in 2010. A mixed-use business park and a research production district. So for example, Phoenix, which is a project that did come to Plan Commission for architectural design review, was Special District 2 was created to accommodate that project because of the type of manufacturing they were doing was not gonna fit on a small lot next to other buildings, things like that, and they needed more space and some, relaxed standards to be able to accommodate that use and to comply with various federal regulations about where their buildings could be located. So that's like an example of, due to the use, the disposition, and the configuration, was not gonna work, let's say in Transect 4 or Transect 5. So, a little more on transects. So every lot that is zoned smart code is assigned a transect. So on the left-hand side, you'll see in our zoning map, everything that's zoned smart code is identified as blue. So when you're looking at our actual zoning map, you're just gonna see a lot of blue. But what's actually happening on the ground is this image to the right, which shows you the transects that have been assigned to each lot. So if we're looking, this is Terra Vesta, by the way, so just west of 14 on MM. So as you can see here, on the outer edges, you have Transect 3 adjacent to like open natural areas. It's gonna have slightly larger lots, bigger setbacks. As you move inward, you're getting into Transect 4. So here we have a mix of single-family townhouses, duplexes. You're providing that kind of variety in housing style. And then as you move here, I don't know if you can see it, but this is the geographic center of the neighborhood. And so this is where you're gonna see an increase in densities, different types of uses, commercial activity, civic buildings. You have the town square identified there. So that's how you're thinking of the progression of a transects over space, where you're increasing density, increasing uses, things like that. And then transects dictate the permitted uses and dimensional standards. So, I think in some ways it's helpful to think of transects similar to our more traditional zoning districts, in that it identifies permitted uses. So the image to the left, if you look here, for example, in T3, so that more like suburban transect, we allow live-work units, so limited home occupation, duplexes, and then different types of single-family housing. Whereas once you move over to T5, which is more of an urban center, you're seeing, mixed-use buildings all the way to townhouses, duplexes, and even some like single-family or two-family type of housing. So you're identifying permitted uses in a transect, and then you're also identifying things you would find in other zoning districts. So things like building height, lot width, lot coverage, setbacks, and then that frontage build-out item that we talked about. So each transect has different standards in terms of building height, lot width, lot coverage, and things like that. So that was kind of the basics of what the smart code ordinance includes and some of the basic elements. And if anyone has any questions, you can discuss them. Yeah.
So with it, basically, like, would the city, like, over time have these, like, separate?
You may want to talk into the
Oh,
microphone a little more.
sorry. So with this, as it develops over time and we implement it across the city, would the city have, like, different cores, basically, like different downtowns?
Right, so that was also one of the sort of ideas with Smart Code, is that hoping that it would create the opportunity to develop more of like a downtown. So I have a map later on in the proposal, but there are different types of Smart Code communities. So you have transit-oriented development, and then you have traditional neighborhood development. And transit-oriented development allows for, higher density, more multifamily, more mixed use, versus traditional neighborhood development, which is more of like a neighborhood scale. So maybe like, in Madison, you have different neighborhoods that have their own kind of main street. So like Willie Street, that's providing neighborhood services. It's certainly a draw, from all over the city. So something in Terra Vista that's more traditional neighborhood development, I think you would expect to see that type of scale. Maybe in a transit-oriented development, so Nine Springs or Uptown is one of the neighborhoods. I think you could probably see the scale and intensity of use that could be more like a downtown. So definitely still thinking, big picture. We don't want to have just sporadic sort of commercial centers throughout the city. So when these various smart code areas have been approved, it's definitely thinking kind of big picture about, is this going to create the downtown that a lot of residents have been looking for, things like that.
I think ends up being some small cores instead of one downtown, though. I think we kind of have that right now. I guess one other question I had for you, Lisa, why doesn't it, and maybe this is something that as we look to make improvements that we want to do, but it seems like there's nothing in the smart code zoning that talks about transitioning from smart code to kind of our traditional type of neighborhood. And that seems to be one of the areas where we get a lot of problems, because I look at Swan Creek in Uptown, just east of City Hall here. You got Swan Creek, beautifully designed and well thought out, and then across the street is smart code, and they put 15 apartment buildings, and it looks completely different. And people in Swan Creek are going, well, wait, what the heck is this? That's not our neighborhood. And they're frustrated by that because there's not the green space, there's no transition into kind of a core smart code. Is that, I don't know if you want to speak to that and that conflict, because I see that as a big conflict, and I think a lot of frustration from our residents.
Sure. So, Sonia, feel free to comment as well. But I think, when property and land is zoned into smart code, that does go through the regular rezoning process, goes to Plan Commission and Common Council. And the, Chapter 23 ordinance kind of outlines the different types of transects that there are, the uses that are permitted, the scale of development. So ideally, as is the case with any rezone that comes to the city, you're looking at surrounding properties, big picture development questions, especially when large tracts of property are rezoned. And ideally, especially with the transect concept, and there are restrictions for, let's say, like you can't have it's recommended against putting transect 5, which is like the higher density transect, next to existing single family. It's not prohibited, it states that it's not ideal. So there is some language in the code acknowledging, transitional spaces from high density to low density. But I think, I don't know, I would think that when the property is rezoned, that surrounding properties are considered as well.
Yeah, I think that just speaks to the frustration. I know that there's a senior housing project going right up the road that was T3 and now it's T5, and it's right next to single family homes. And so there is that transition. I think that's the other piece to it, is that right now, when they want to make changes to the transects, it's not approved by council or Plan Commission. And I think that's where the frustration comes as well, because at one point it was well thought out, and I think a lot better plan, and then someone comes in and says, well, I want to put apartments here at T5, and they can just go and do that without council or plan commission approval. So now we have a apartment building going up right next to a couple single-family homes right up Lacey Road here. And there is that, not that transition, and it wasn't approved by anyone that is up here. So, Randy,
Right.
go ahead.
Just to that point, so what is the process then? I mean, does it go to just strictly to zoning and it excludes council and every other department that you've listed? Or, I mean, is that by design?
Right, so I'm gonna get onto the smart code approval process in the next section. So it'll probably
okay.
answer a lot of your questions. And, just one comment as well is that when the code is adopted, it dictates how much of a certain transect is permitted in a neighborhood. So these are, you can maybe have like 30 to 40% of a neighborhood be transect 5. And these were, standards that were adopted by council, by plan commission as saying, this is the percentage that we're comfortable with, as well as the administrative approval process. And, it does in the code recommend against placing multifamily next to single family, but the code could have been written to prohibit that type of thing as well. But when the code is being implemented, there are certain, safeguards in place, and the code having been approved by the city.
Okay.
But I think if we talk about the smart code approval process a little more, I think it might help answer some questions.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Sony here. I can just provide one specific example to help explain that as well. We did receive a proposal in concept to do a more dense development, something that would more fit into the T5 transect on Lacey Road in what's called the North Park Smart Code neighborhood. So again, this was a higher density proposal, and they wanted to modify and go up to the T5 from what was T3 and T4. And one of those safeguards that Lisa mentioned, where there's a cap on portion that can be in T5, that's what ended up limiting or prohibiting that development from proceeding. So that safeguard worked in that case to prohibit that T5 from going next to single family residential. But if there were additional safeguards or modifications like that, those are, critiques that could be considered again through the legislative process.
So Lisa, is there any parkland considerations as you go from one transect zone to the other? I mean, like T5 is going to be more expensive real estate, and the developer is going to have to contribute some parkland fees. But are there any limitations to what actually is allowed in each of those zones?
For parking or
Parkland.
Oh, parkland. Yeah, so parkland is handled, I'll actually touch on that as well in this process. But if I don't answer it, let me know. Just don't want to jump ahead too much. So maybe we'll talk about a little bit about the approval process. So kind of touched on this briefly. So Common Council, obviously, as well as Plan Commission, approves any ordinance language, including ordinance amendments. Some of those have come through in this last year, as well as land division. So that includes plats, certified survey maps, and then rezone requests when property is zoned into Smart Code, as well as hypothetically out of Smart Code. I don't think we've had any of those instances yet. And then it's city staff that approve the neighborhood scale plans and then individual projects. And so with that, I think I've touched on some of the concepts, but we'll get into it a little bit more in the following slides, is that Smart Code has a lot of fixed rules and standards, which all developments have to follow at both, the neighborhood scale as well as the individual lot. And if you're comparing that, let's say, to like PDD zoning, so Planned Development District, which does not have any set standards, and it's really, a negotiation between the developer and the city where they get to propose their own zoning standards that then have to be approved by the city. And so that requires a lot more oversight, 3 meetings with Plan Commission to approve a rezone. So because Smart Code has a lot of these kind of, ideally has predictable standards for development, that's why when the code was approved, it allowed for staff approvals. And I'll get into a little bit more about, what those standards and fixed rules are in the next few slides. So every Smart Code neighborhood has an Article 3 plan, which is, I think, similar to a neighborhood plan where you're thinking big picture, what does a large area look like? So this image here on the left is, or on the right is North Park. So that's at Cyene and Lacey. So far it's been developed primarily with the apartment buildings here. But in this Article 3 plan or neighborhood plan, they've allocated the transects. So you can see here, the darker purple T4, T5, T3. They've established their road network, which ideally is similar to more like a grid pattern where you're having multiple entrances and exits. You're determining your block size. So that's what we talked about here. How long does it take from somebody to get from here to there? This is their block size. And it's also designating open space. So Rich, to your question here, that kind of yellow square in the middle is their primary civic space. And then the green space behind is also open space. So all parkland requirements are handled at the neighborhood scale, and they have a certain percentage of their acreage needs to be used for parkland. So it's not like with our regular zoning district, where it's like a certain amount of acreage per unit. It's like 10%, let's say, of a neighborhood has to be park space. And then they also have different types of park space. So you have, let's say, more of like a conservancy open space all the way to a paved plaza that might serve more for like a farmer's market or like, music events, things like that. So that's all similar to something you would see like in our McGaw Park plan, right? Where they're identifying their land uses, their road network, and things like that. And all of this is dictated by our smart code ordinance. So this is a big table, so I don't want to get into it too much, but when we're talking about the prescriptive standards of smart code, this is what we're talking about. So if you're looking at, let's say, T5, here, if we're looking at a transit-oriented community, right, so we have different smart code communities, you can have 40 to 60% of that community be transit-oriented or be T5. In traditional neighborhood developments, you can have 5 to 40% be T5. So that's where you're seeing, different types of communities with different development expectations. So if one community is traditional neighborhood development, there's going to be, significantly less of the T5 and a lot more of T3, of like a single family. Versus a transit-oriented development where the intent is to create densities that can be served by transit, you're going to be seeing higher density and more commercial uses. And that's why you're seeing like an increase, let's say, in Transect 5. But they have to stay within those limits. So like when city staff gets an Article 3 plan, they're confirming that they are allocating their transects within these parameters and in a way, that's creates for suitable development. And then it also, here, it limits density based on transect. So in T3, you're seeing 3 to 8 units per acre. In our low density residential zoning district, minimum lot size is 10,000 square feet. An acre is about 43,000 square feet for reference. So that 3 units per acre is similar. And then it's increasing T4, and then T5 has the density minimum. There's also a certain amount within those transects has to be residential. So in that way, you're limiting the amount of like commercial uses that are permitted in each district. And obviously, as you get to increased density, you're going to see more variation in how much residential uses are required. And again, you have block perimeter. So, and then we're getting into even what type of streets are suitable for each transect. So in T3, for example, you don't want to see an 80-foot wide right-of-way with 8-foot wide sidewalks, a median. But that's something that is, more appropriate in Transect 5. So we're even getting into sidewalk widths, what type of trees, how many parking spaces are provided on a street. And that's all outlined in the smart code. And then again, getting to civic spaces, it outlines different types of civic spaces that can be found in a community and saying which ones are appropriate in each transect. So you can even, know, what kind of civic spaces can I expect to see adjacent to Transect 3 versus what kinds of civic spaces can I see in T4 or T5. So for example, like a square is suitable obviously in an urban area, but that's not something that you would expect to see next to single family houses. So this is when we're talking about, the standards and rules of smart code are very specific, and ideally it creates predictable standards for development, which creates, a certain level of comfort, both for Plan Commission and Council, but also for residents. Any questions on that?
And this also explains, sorry, Lisa, what we mean when we say an integrated code. So it's integrating the land uses and the development on the private property with the street types and with the park types.
Yep, thanks, Sonia. Any questions on some of those concepts? It's a big table.
So one of the things that you can see from looking at the map there is that the transects really generally, you shift from one transect to another mid-block rather than at the street level, so that you have the same types of properties on each side of the street, and then you have a mid-block transition. So I think that's one of the things that, if you look at Cyane Road as an example, you do have single-family homes, before it transitions back into although the multifamily is right around where East Sherrill comes across, but you also have that on the Swan Creek side of the road there too. So, there is an attempt there, I think, to create that transition. Maybe it's still too stark a transition for some people, but,
Yeah, I think that's the intent. So, looking at North Park, looking at the Article 3 plan, if you see here, adjacent to this, for example, is existing single family, and the majority of that land adjacent to it is supposed to be single family as well, or duplexes would be, the higher end of that density. And then it does allow for, again, the transition. So here you're seeing a transition from T3 to T4 to T5 with the idea that, Lacey Road is a major, one of the larger streets in the city, and that T5 is an appropriate use or density facing a thoroughfare like that. I mean, obviously, there is some conflict at the edges. So I definitely think, the code tries to promote, the language, I think, definitely creates transitions well within an Article 3 plan. But I think, as the case with, any development, there's always going to be some conflict, I think, at the edges that ideally are mitigated as much as possible. Any other questions? All right. So another Smart Code approval is the Article 5 plan. So the way that every Smart Code neighborhood has an Article 3 plan, every Smart Code lot has an Article 5 plan. I want to say Article 5 is kind of similar to an architectural design review, but it also touches on a couple of additional items, but trying to create some comparisons here. So an Article 5 plan is going to identify the building use, the density, if it's a residential structure. It's going to show you the site plan, so parking, landscaping, everything like that, as well as the architectural design. So for example, like this is a building that we reviewed in the Nine Springs neighborhood. So similarly to the way that the ordinance has a lot of set rules for at the neighborhood scale, the same applies for Article 5 plans. So the types of things that the Smart Code ordinance addresses includes building materials. So for example, if a multifamily or commercial building wants to use vinyl, they have to come to Plan Commission for that approval. So they're required to use like stone on the first floor and then like a composite wood siding on upper floors. It dictates how much of a floor can be windows, the type of front entrance. So are they using a stoop, a porch, traditional kind of commercial entrance? It dictates that, where the parking has to be. So it has to be at the rear of the lot. And we're establishing landscaping minimums, so the number of shrubs and trees that are required. So, this is the kind of level of detail that the ordinance gets to, as opposed to, let's say, like architectural design review, the types of things that come to Plan Commission. There aren't these kinds of set standards. So that's where that additional level of review comes in with Plan Commission for projects that aren't zone smart code. So any questions on Article 5 plans and kind of how that process works? And all of these, so when we get an Article 3 plan or an Article 5 plan, it goes through the same internal review process that any other kind of project goes through the city. So we send it to the local alders for comments, for review, and we send it all to all departments. So, Public Works, Economic Development, Assessing, the city attorney, they all review the applications just as they would with any kind of, project that comes to Plan Commission. And we, especially for, larger projects, so we recommend having like a neighborhood meeting, reaching out to alders to discuss the project and things like that. So in some ways it follows a process similar to other applications. Any other questions? All right, so maybe something that's a little bit more fun. We can look at just some examples and kind of see what this looks like on the ground. So I think we've talked about it a little bit. Might have been better to show this map earlier on, but these are our smart code neighborhoods. So you see North Park kind of at the south. So we have Lacey and Syene. This is our smallest smart code neighborhood, but they did meet the minimum acreage requirement. Then we have Nine Springs and / Uptown neighborhood, kind of referred to as both. So here you have New Lacey, as the mayor likes to call it, coming up through here, crossing Highway 14. Then you have MM, and this is Terra Vesta. So Nine Springs is a transit-oriented development following, in our comprehensive plan, for example, we have identified this area as being suitable for, a transit location, say if this rail corridor were ever reactivated for transit. So this was identified as an area suitable for like a higher density, higher level of development versus, let's say, Terra Vesta, that's on a county road, is not gonna likely, be served by some kind of transit, is more on the edges of the city, is probably more suitable for a traditional neighborhood development where you're gonna be seeing, more of the single family to townhouse to duplex kind of development. So these are our neighborhoods. So we got North Park, Nine Springs, and Terra Vesta. Here are some pictures. So this is an example of what Transect 4 would look like. So if we're looking at this picture on the left, you can see you have townhouses here, and then it transitions into single family housing, all on the same street. You can see that the townhouses are brought up, close to the sidewalk. The stairs for their porches come straight out to the sidewalk. Sidewalks on both streets. You have parking on both streets. And then as you, transition, you have a bit of a higher density going to lower density. And then here is an example of single family housing on the same street. So what does a T4 single family house look like? You're gonna have smaller setbacks. So traditionally in our single family neighborhoods, you're seeing like a 30-foot front setback. These are limited at a max of 18. And you're also seeing that they're required to have porches. So you're trying to bring people, out of their houses into their front yards. You're putting in sidewalks and creating opportunities for interaction. The garages are set back at least 20 feet from the front of the house. So again, thinking about, human scale versus auto-oriented. So a lot of houses in our other neighborhoods, the garage takes up the majority of the front of the home, and you're really having people pull into their garage, go into their house from their garage, and not really out on the sidewalks or in their yards. And you're seeing the smaller setbacks between houses as well.
Another example that you can see in this photo is the driveway width. So within the first layer, again, limiting the impact of that auto-oriented use, the width is limited And then you can see as you move further back in the lot into the different layers, how it flares out near the garage. So just another small detail.
Yeah, so it's all those kind of, and these are all, you know, specifically written out in the code. So, you know, when I approve the Article 5 plans from anything from a single family house to like a mixed use building, and there's probably 100 lines of code that's going to be applied to each of these Article 5 plans that I check off and make sure that they're meeting all of those requirements. So anything from driveway width to building material, things like that. So an example of an apartment in Transect 5. So this is in the Nine Springs neighborhood. So some things to look at. So here you see, again, thinking about the interaction of, you know, the thoroughfare to the building. You see parking here on the edges, and then it's not showing up super well on the screen, but that's actually a separated bike path. So you're creating multimodal transportation. Then you have your street trees, you have the sidewalk. They're required to connect all their parking areas directly to the sidewalk. And you can see like the landscaping kind of standards that you'll find, you know, throughout Smart Code. They're required to put in street walls, so these like 3 or 4 foot tall walls to screen parking. This is getting back to that kind of sense of enclosure, creating a safe environment for pedestrians and really putting the pedestrian first. And then you can also see, you know, even for a multifamily building in Smart Code, the setback maximum is 12 feet. Typically in apartments, you can see, you know, in a planned development district, like 30 or 40 feet setbacks. You can also see, if you're looking at the picture on the right, they're required, you know, if you have a first floor residential use, they have an entrance to the sidewalk, the stairs go right to the sidewalk. You can also see it a little bit better in the picture to the left, where all the porches project out of the building facade. So versus more often you see them recessed into the building, which is again creating greater recesses and decreasing spatial containment at the street, and also the idea of like bringing people out and creating opportunities for interaction. So if the porch is coming out of the building, people can see each other better, and you know, it's just about creating a sense of community and eyes on the street, if you were. So this is what, you know, a typical development we've seen for Transect 5. And they actually also, at the corner here, they actually did a retail ready type of development. So like if a need for commercial uses starts to, you know, become, I guess, the demand is there as more people live in this neighborhood, that space is readily converted to commercial use. And the code has requirements for, you know, how do you create a space that can be both commercial as well as residential. So one of the ways that I think Smart Code can be adaptive to changing uses and changing needs and markets. And then lastly, we've got an example of one of our special districts. So this is the Phoenix building, also on Lacey. So some of the things you can see that, you know, were modified to accommodate this kind of development. So we typically wouldn't allow a one-story building in transit-oriented development, so the minimum is 2. So they were given, you know, they have a one-story building for a portion. They don't have a main entrance on the sidewalk. They have one setback by their parking area. They also don't have, you know, so we have minimum glazing requirements. So here you can see, like in their manufacturing area, you know, they're not going to have windows at ground level. So these are the ways that special districts can accommodate these types of projects. You know, they have another building setback where they're doing their really heavily regulated manufacturing. They can't have that right up at the sidewalk. So these are, this is an example of what a special district development would look like. Not to say that you can't accommodate manufacturing, but that's just one example. So hopefully that helped illustrate a lot of the words and some of the technical things that I discussed today. But if you have any questions or comments, this would be.
Other questions or comments people have? Ed, looks like you might be ready to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. So, I mean, this really creates a situation for a developer and an architect if they understand smart code and they design a building that fits smart code, it really, it does mean that it doesn't come in front of Plan Commission, but it's also far less steps to get that level of economic development. It makes it a lot easier for the developers. They've got to meet some very strict prescriptive requirements to get there. And if it doesn't meet it, it gets kicked out to us.
Yeah, so a lot of accommodations. So for example, when a developer really pushed to be able to use vinyl, that was brought forward to Plan Commission and they found something they were comfortable with. So typically those are kinds of accommodations then require an additional level of approval, like from Plan Commission or something like that would be one example.
Anything else?
Thanks, it was great.
Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Randy.
Is this a statewide smart code, or is this a strictly Fitchburg? I mean, how prevalent is it out there in the?
So as far as I know, we're the only community in Wisconsin that utilizes smart code, but it's used, across the country. So the origins of it are based in a movement called Congress for the New Urbanism, which is essentially primarily like a planning movement focused on bringing traditional neighborhood design back to America, moving away from, let's say, like 1970s style subdivisions, cars, things like that. So it has its foundations in like an academic setting.
Well, I was going to say, it gives you that impression of what's old is new again. I mean, having lived out east in some of the larger cities, Baltimore, D.C., it almost looks as if, and based on that experience, a lot of this concept is, they're melded together. So.
Right. Yeah, and I know, for example, the Congress for the New Urbanism, they developed a model smart code. So like when a community decides to adopt smart code, they usually start off with this sort of general smart code. So most communities have started from the base, from the same code, and then they modify it to meet the needs of their community. So, one of the things that when Fitchburg considered smart code that Plan Commission and Council really wanted to see was that transects need to be the same on either side of the street. So like if you have T3 on one side, you should have T3 on the other, excuse me. We do provide some flexibility. So, it doesn't have to happen everywhere, but the majority of the neighborhood does have to have that. So that's something that is actually really not common in smart code, but was something that provided a certain level of comfort and, for the city when they were considering the code.
Well, just as one additional follow-up, I mean, the part that I was disappointed, though, was when I saw the rail corridor. It seemed to be going directly through nothing but residential. I mean, I guess maybe it was implemented at a time where they felt that rail corridor would never be used again for industrial, or maybe they thought it would be further south or further north. And I understand you can also transport people, but for instance, Phoenix is not on that rail corridor if that rail corridor were to ever come back. And that's certainly a viable option, but I just don't know if you have any information on that as to why or why not it wasn't incorporated, or even maybe thought as far as those transects.
Sure. Yeah, so I know there have definitely been discussions in the past about, I think maybe even Ed or Aaron could probably provide more background on, I think, some of the things that have happened with the rail corridor itself, but I think in the comprehensive plan, it definitely discusses opportunities for transit-oriented development, and I think even reactivating the corridor for commercial or other types of uses. And I think we can go back to the smart code map. So I believe this is the rail corridor coming right through here. So the comprehensive plan identifies this corner as being potentially a transit stop. So that's somewhere where you would be seeing potentially, some light industrial, higher density of people, commercial area that's suitable for that type of development. I think, their light industrial, for example, is permitted in Transect 5. So if that rail corridor was activated to accommodate commercial or industrial operations, that land would be available to somebody to pursue that kind of development. So I think the opportunities would be there if there was
yeah.
demand or
As you
interest.
pointed out, and I see the visual. All right, thank you.
Did you want to add anything to that, Ed?
Yeah, well, I think there's an opportunity for passenger rail to come back at some time too, because if you follow that line down, it goes down through Evansville, Janesville, goes all the way to Chicago. Now, there's a lot of places where it's broken. It would need to be kind of reconnected. Brooklyn is one of those places where there's a crossing that's taken out. But if that were to occur at some point, that's part of the reason why you do also want to have some of the residential near there. That's really what the TOD idea was all about, that, you know, we would potentially have enough density in there to support passenger rail. Whether it's just short going up to Madison or whether it's a longer stretch at some point. It may be, 20, 40, 80, 100 years down the road, but trying to look a little bit out into the future too.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep that in mind. Yeah.
Anyone else?
All right. Well, thanks for sort of sitting through that. I know it's a lot of information, and I'll probably send this out just so that you can take a look at it and maybe include links to the ordinances. And we have resources on the City of Fitchburg website that provide it in a little bit more of a digestible manner than the ordinance itself. So hopefully we'll help with some of the discussions that we've had. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. Moving along, report from department. Sonia.
Just that our next meeting is May 18th, nothing additional.
All right. For announcements, actually, I probably should have done this before. I'd like to welcome both Randy and Emily to Planning Commission. Randy's our new council rep. Tom retired and from council service anyway. And so Randy's replacing him, and Emily was approved earlier tonight. Do you want to tell people just a little bit about yourself? Sorry to put you on the spot, but.
There we go. Yeah, so just a little bit about me. I was born and raised in the area, went away for college, lived in New York for a bit, and then came back a little bit over a year ago and just love being back. I have, as you guys know, or you may or may not know, I have a background in media planning, so a different type of planning, but I think there's a lot of applicable skills in terms of being able to think ahead, project, look through data. There's a certain comfort level there. I also, in addition to this commission, I serve on the Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative Grant Review Committee. Yeah, and I guess in my downtime, I love learning, especially languages. So I'm taking Spanish now, just for fun, and love reading, and yeah, love enjoying the parks in Fitchburg. That's one of my favorites.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Rich can help you to learn Icelandic.
Really?
Ja, and svensk.
What does that mean?
Yes. It's a long story.
All right. Any other announcements? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
By Rich, seconded by Randy. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? All right. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.